Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and that's it. I have a slight treat for you today. I'm going to be critiquing an episode of Crash Coarse Philosophy. Now, anyone who follows me on Ask FM is going to understand my position on most philosophical work in the modern era. I think it's explaining the obvious while pretending to have invented the obvious, as well as glorifying the act of speculation to be parallel with the act of proving something. I have no problem with people thinking about ideas, pondering, or speculating. I mean, my channel is dedicated to that pretty much. I just don't think that philosophy does too much anymore. It all gets engulfed by science, but there's one thing that science cannot engulf, and that's language. And since I am someone who loves language, it has been requested that I tackle this video, which is titled, How Words Can Harm, Crash Course Philosophy number 28. I'm going to keep this nice and civil, and I'm only going to respond to the places where you actually make points. That isn't a slight against you or anything like that. It's just a lot of this video is presenting information, and I have no qualms with people giving out information, so I'm just going to be skipping around a bit. I just didn't want to be accused of quote mining or anything like that. I wouldn't want this video to be 2 hours long, but I also wouldn't want it to remain completely unaddressed. Perhaps I can assist you in determining what it is a decent amount of people disliked about your video. It's all you, Hank.
A warning. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy contains language that may be upsetting for some viewers and may not be appropriate for viewing in certain settings.
Every single episode of Crash Course Philosophy contains language that may be upsetting for some viewers and may not be appropriate for viewing in certain settings. I don't understand what this is supposed to be. Are you warning people that racial slurs or swear words are incoming? If that's the case, why weren't you more specific about it? You should have been more specific about it. If this is a video about language, I'm surprised that your language was so imprecise here. Can anyone think of a sentence, or even a word, that would necessarily not upset some people? Microphone. Oh, nope, you just said that around a person whose parents were bludgeoned to death by microphone-wielding bandits and now they're crying. I really like that dress you have on. Nope, her boyfriend was behind you and now he's mad at you. The only language that I could think of are singular words that mean next to nothing on their own. Merely the necessary connections between words like the, or and, or, completely devoid of context and meaning. So I guess we've established it then. Only words that mean nothing won't upset anyone. Wait, I get upset when people use words that don't mean anything and pretend like they mean something. Back to the drawing board. I honestly hope that you understood what I was trying to get at there.
Consider the following sentence. Jason shot a mouse in his boxer shorts. Simple enough. Or is it?
It could mean a lot of things. Why don't you explain them to us?
Like, my first thought was that Jason was wearing the boxer shorts when he shot the mouse. But maybe the mouse was wearing Jason's boxer shorts, or maybe the mouse was wearing his own boxer shorts? Or was the mouse in Jason's boxer shorts while he was wearing them? And while we're at it, what kind of shooting are we talking about? Was it done with a gun or with a camera? Words can go wrong in lots of different ways. And when they do, the problem usually comes down to the distinction between speaker meaning and audience meaning, or what a speaker intends, as opposed to what a listener understands.
This is why people put so much stress on defining terms. Because if you absolutely refuse to define terms, then two people could be marching into a discussion having a completely different linguistic roadmap, and nothing ever gets discussed or done. For example, not all slang or dialect is understood by everyone, and some of it's regional. People call different nouns different things in different places despite speaking the same general language. And the thing is, this calls forward to one of the problems people had with this video within the comment section and ratings bar. The speaker is trying to convey a specific meaning. They say something with a certain intention, whether it's to make a point, get a laugh, cause a different emotion, draw attention to something in the room, or whatever. They have that particular reason for saying the thing they said. Yet, their audience may have interpreted it in a different way as opposed to what the speaker was trying to convey. There are two situations in which someone could act like an asshole in this scenario. The speaker could demean the audience for not understanding language that's reasonably ambiguous as to have many plausible interpretations, or the audience could insist that their interpretation was the intended meaning regardless of what the speaker has to say about the matter. For example, if I say, "That vacuum sucks," I could be describing a vacuum that works or doesn't work. It can work with tone of voice as well. That vacuum sucks. That vacuum sucks. And I mean, it's in the second instance, you can kind of assume there's another vacuum in the room that isn't working. But you get what I mean though, right? It's not only plausible for the speaker to be an asshole in this scenario. The audience can be a mob of assholes to a single speaker over something they didn't intend or even think about conveying. And I don't think that we should fault the speaker for the listener's inability to interpret the actual intended meaning and going nuts, rather than asking, what did you mean by that? That happens a lot more often than you'd think. You kind of ignore that fact when you're discussing hate speech, which we will jump to.
When a speaker's attitude doesn't match that of their audience, their words, whether they were intended to just be funny or edgy or dirty, can end up being seriously harmful.
What do you mean by seriously harmful? And I don't think words convey those attitudes as much as everything revolving around the words convey the attitude. Unless the person's statement is, I'm feeling X today, or something like that. Body language, tone of voice, even the location represents attitudes better than the words do, especially when you're discussing the whole funny, edgy, or dirty thing. That's why unless you explicitly state that you're being sarcastic in some way, sarcasm through text regarding someone you have no knowledge of is very difficult to detect. Because that's the thing, they're just words on a page, which is why this phenomenon appears to be more common when people are communicating via text only. If you're on trial for the murder of your best friend, and the prosecutor presents an email as evidence where you state, I'm gonna kill you, it's gonna be a lot more damning than a video of your best friend being annoying and you quite clearly jokingly saying, I'm gonna kill you. There's a distinct reason for that, which needs to be acknowledged. And I suppose that can be seriously harmful to the person on trial, but I don't think you meant seriously harmful in that particular way. I think you mean emotionally, if the rest of your video is any indication. Remember people, watch the whole video for context. It's in the description, I'm just dealing with specific points here.
The reason that sentence is so confusing is because we understand most language by context.
And that's partly the reason why I disagree with hate speech laws. It's nearly impossible to be precise about what does and doesn't qualify. Nobody can tell the future about what's going to be received as hateful or offensive by a specific person. It opens up insane avenues of abuse involved with people getting their feelings hurt. Nothing's objectively offensive or inoffensive for that matter, and it completely halts the natural evolution of language in stating by law, these are the only ways in which these words are used, and these are the only meanings they may have. It doesn't just oppress people, it oppresses the very nature of language when those laws are put into place. It oppresses specific opinions necessarily, and I'm not a fan of that at all.
There's also the personal context that each of you brings to the conversation. Like, if somebody makes a stupid, off-the-cuff joke about your mother, that could turn out to be really painful if your mother has recently died.
And I think right there he's demonstrated what his definition of seriously harmful is.
But when it comes to the injuries caused by language, the greater concern for us here is words that are deliberately chosen to cause harm.
He mentions my bit about body language and tone of voice in regards to text a little earlier, but I wanted to hone in on this point. I'm going to assume that someone taking offense to a yo mama joke because their mother just died is an example of one of these injuries. What doesn't count as one of these injuries? Sometimes I think it's completely justified to use words meant to deliberately cause harm to another person, whether it be harm to their ego or whatever. I'm not talking about physical harm, and neither are you. If someone refuses to let anyone speak during a get-together, they keep interrupting everyone else and no one can get a word in edgewise because this person just keeps yapping about how great they are, I think I'm justified in saying, hey, can you quit interrupting everyone? You're being a bit of an asshole right now. One could easily construe that to be words chosen deliberately to cause harm. You're pointing out someone's crappy behavior by saying, hey, cut it out with the crappy behavior. And no one wants to be told they're behaving poorly, and that has the possibility of harming them, or having them go into some sort of ego protection frenzy. These things are far too ambiguous to ever be reasonably written into law, and I'm very disappointed that you didn't deliver the other side of the issue within this video. You guys are normally alright at that. Let's just jump to hate speech.
In contrast, hate speech consists of words that are directed at a member of a group, and they're used specifically because of that person's membership in that group.
Mathematician. I mean, I suppose I'll have to come up with a slur, so mathies. Does this now count as hate speech? my mocking mathematicians by calling them that. For whatever reason, oh no, not for whatever reason, I chose that word deliberately to harm them. I want them to feel bad about being mathematicians.
These groups are generally based on something that's key to a person's identity, like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or religion.
Or occupation. Not all of those things you mentioned are immutable. People change religions all the time, or leave them. Plus, not everyone identifies themselves by those criteria. Well, that's a little bit nitpicky. I'm sure lots of people are going to think a decent amount of this video is nitpicky, but it really isn't. It's important that I point these things out. Why are those things the specific things that are key to someone's identity? What about ideas? Someone's political leaning? Is being harsh and critical regarding someone's religious beliefs an example of hate speech? There are words directed at them for being a quote-unquote member of this particular group. There are words chosen deliberately to cause harm. I don't see why, by this criteria, these things shouldn't be classified if you're going to classify religion as well. There are some things you can't control, and while I understand that using certain words can be harmful to the emotions, I don't think that any word is necessarily harmful. What matters is context. I stand by what I'm dubbing the kindergartner's maxim, which is sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I think that other people should try to exemplify it as well, as opposed to making me walk on different platforms of different colored eggshells whenever I'm around them. And I definitely do not want my government instituting a law that states eggshells should be strewn across the ground throughout the country, or else you could face a fine or prison time. Here's what I'm trying to get across here, and hopefully it's reasonable enough. I don't usually go around calling people identity-specific bad words, but I don't think calling people identity-specific bad words is worthy of being called a crime. Not a single person, myself included, can be trusted to be the person who writes up a list of all the bad words and be objective about it, because language is, by its very nature, not objective. And there will never be a final judgment on words. The dictionary isn't even a final judgment on words. It changes all the time by what we just say stuff means now. I said that I'd keep this civil, but all of this beating around the bush is killing me. I will not allow someone else's delicate feelings to be enshrined in law, and I refuse to be prevented from saying any word or any opinion in any context, anywhere, ever. Okay, now I'm skipping ahead to the second main point.
Hate speech is typically understood as more morally problematic than dirty words because hate speech is designed to hurt. But how can mere words cause harm? To understand this, we need to talk about a linguistic phenomenon known as thick concepts. These are words or ideas that come preloaded not just with descriptive meaning, but also with evaluative content. There are attitudes and values that are baked into these words that are hard, if not impossible, to unbake. For instance, murder is a thick concept that contains a description. It means to kill someone, but it also contains evaluation. Murder is unjustified killing. There's no such thing as a good murder. Now, with this concept in mind, let's consider a theory about how certain words cause harm posed by American lawyer Charles R. Lawrence III. Lawrence argues that hate speech should be legally punishable in the United States, just as it is in some other countries. His argument focuses on thick concepts that are used to disparage a person for simply being who they are. What's problematic about these concepts, he says, is that you can't pull their descriptive meaning away from their inherent negativity. Both the meaning and the attitude are tied up in a single word.
Faggot. I used that word because it's the example you use in this video. But do you think that Charles R. Lawrence III can discern my attitude towards homosexual people simply from my speaking that word? He did say single word, so faggot. I'm not giving him any more information, just that. The fact that I said the word faggot. If his answer is anything but, I have no idea, then he's lying to you, Hank. 100% lying. There's no way he can determine it. He can only assume it. I won't hold you to his argument, obviously. But the fact that you presented his argument and another argument kind of supporting him and not the counter in this video, that's probably what stirred people up. I'm not sure if you plan on uploading a counterpoint, but that probably should have been made a little more clear.
Let me give you an example, a word that I am going to have a hard time saying. It's a hateful word, but we can't pretend it doesn't exist, because in a sense, that mentality, the idea that certain words shouldn't be discussed and analyzed and argued about, gives these words even more power. The word I want to talk about is faggot. This word has descriptive content in that it's commonly used to describe a homosexual man. But that description is bound up with an inherently hateful attitude, so much so that the target of the word is unable to separate that attitude from the fact about his identity.
Then that is the problem with the target of the word. You know what you never discussed? The identity of the speaker of the word. What if the speaker of that word is a gay person? I've heard gay people call each other faggot in jest before. I've also heard straight people and gay people together using the word faggot, and the target of the word didn't mind it. In fact, everyone, including the target of the word, found it hilarious and just lumped it in with all the other playful insults everyone was throwing around. That is because the listener understood the intended meaning of the speaker via context. But under Mr. Lawrence's metric that you kindly presented, that would be dubbed hate speech, which sheds that context as irrelevant because the particular word is what matters more. Does that sound right to you? This is what happens when someone tries to make the subjective necessarily objective. Everything starts to not make sense. Everything that shouldn't have counterexamples has counterexamples.
The point of using a word like that is to harm. That's all it's used for. That is its sole purpose.
Faggot. Why did I just say that? Go ahead. Tell me that you're reading my mind over the use of a single word. See, this is what I was talking about earlier. You're taking the burden of understanding completely off of the audience and laying it entirely on the speaker. According to what you just said, there should be 0 instances where someone uses the word faggot non-objectively without the intent to harm someone to their very core about their identity. So tell me, Hank, who did I harm just now? Name them. I'm gonna go smoke a fag out by the faggot in the yard. QED?
And Lawrence argues that while free speech is important to democracy, hate speech should not be protected. Instead, he says, hate speech should be understood as belonging to the class of speech known as fighting words. And yes, that's an actual term. They're not just for cartoon cowboys. Fighting words are words that are meant to incite violence. And since the point of protecting speech is to promote open communication, Lawrence says, words that are designed to replace communication with violence and fear don't deserve constitutional protection.
Except it doesn't work that way. You simply cannot, under the First Amendment, restrict speech due to the ideas or opinions expressed. These words do not inherently incite violence. Nobody decided to get up and kill some gay people when I said faggot non-objectively a little bit earlier. You seem to have a problem with the ideas and opinions expressed when someone says the word faggot in a hateful manner towards gay people. And I don't like that they're being hateful towards gay people. But I know that some gay people would just laugh it off and say, damn right I'm a faggot. But some flower petals may get upset by the fact that they're expressing the idea that a part of their identity is bad. So let's say you ban all slurs ever invented about gay people from being used non-objectively. Then somebody walks up to a gay person and says, I absolutely despise your lifestyle. The fact that you're attracted to other men makes me sick and you should be ashamed for destroying this country. Is that also hate speech? Because then you would be restricting speech on the basis of the ideas and opinions expressed, not any sort of inciting to violence bullshit that Lawrence is trying to pull on you regarding singular words. Restricting speech because of the ideas and opinions expressed. Shitty ideas, but ideas nonetheless, is never acceptable. You don't get to dictate the expression of ideas and opinions because they make people feel bad.
Contemporary American philosopher Stephanie Ross offers another explanation of the way that words can harm. Let's head over to the thought bubble to explore it with some flash philosophy. Rather than focusing on words that most people would agree are negative, Ross deals with words that generally seem innocuous. Think of the word baby, used as a term of endearment among adults, particularly applied to women. Nothing wrong with calling your significant other baby, right? Well, Ross thinks there might be. She says that words people use to refer to us can create what's known as metaphorical identification. Think about the characteristics of your average baby. Helpless, dependent, relying on others to care for them, to make decisions for them. Ross argues that when a person is repeatedly referred to with a word like baby, a metaphorical identification gradually takes place where...
Okay, Stephanie Ross, no. You're being ridiculous. I'm sure when people keep calling me honey, I slowly start to think of myself as a jar of sticky, sugary stuff that goes great with tea. I'm just going to skip to the portion where people probably got the most mad at you, Hank.
Now, maybe you have opinions and reasons for those opinions that you feel justify using this word, but it might also be the case that you don't actually think there's anything wrong with having casual sex or wearing certain kinds of clothes. So you might want to think twice about using a word like that. Because when you use it, you're signaling a specific attitude to other people. You're endorsing that attitude. So if it's an attitude you don't really hold and one you don't think others should hold, you should take care not to spread it through your speech.
And this is where I got the most upset with you. You become an entire planet of contradictions here. You may not actually endorse that attitude, but when you use a word where you're not even intending to signify that attitude, you're totally signifying that attitude, so don't use that word unless you actively want more people to slut shame or whatever. You don't endorse an entire attitude through the use of one word. You're trying to infer things that aren't necessarily there. Words are trying to evolve before your very eyes to be less hurtful, and you're saying, no, these words must remain powerful and hurtful because they're currently too powerful and hurtful. No, 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 no. Don't make the mistake that every Puritan makes every single time nonsense like this comes up. If you ban or forcefully stigmatize a harmless behavior, people will want to do it more. You're trying to stop the evolution of language. And this is just evolution. This is not language abuse. Please learn the difference between these two things. One is done by simply yelling that words mean different things now into the abyss, nearly always with an ideological goal of some type, while the other happens very gradually and innocuously through a whole host of different means. And I'm not saying that the use of words cannot convey attitudes, I'm saying that the use of a specific word doesn't necessarily display or actively endorse an attitude. You're just flat out wrong here.
Okay, now let me make just one more point. No one is telling you what you should or shouldn't say here. That's not my job. You should take care not to spread it through your speech. So you might want to think twice about using a word like that. No one is telling you what you should or shouldn't say.
So you might want to think twice about using a word like that.
My job is to help you scrutinize with a philosopher's distance the language that we all use. The philosophy of language can help us bring scary, powerful words out into the open and figure out why they're scary and powerful. And then, with reasoned arguments, we can understand and explain how the language that we use can inflict harm on others. Obviously, deliberately using words to harm is awful. But even if you don't intend hate with the words you use, your audience might not understand that, because speaker meaning and audience meaning don't always match up. Only by thinking seriously about the words we use and what they mean can we understand how they might be perceived by others.
You can't simply tell me that you're not trying to tell people what they should or shouldn't say when you've expressly advocated for not saying certain things a few seconds prior. I mean, I'm speechless. You said that if anyone who doesn't hold any of these awful attitudes uses these awful words, then they're necessarily endorsing an attitude that they don't even hold, regardless of context, and regardless of whether their audience cared to find out the intended meaning in the first place. And isn't that the issue here? You take all of the burden off of the listener to be polite about what the speaker says, you stamp beliefs onto people who don't hold them, you say that we understand most of our language through context, and yet with certain words, context doesn't even matter. What was this? I sincerely hope a counterpoint to this video comes out, because this was a bunch of one-sided, nonsensical, overly sensitive bullshit. I really hope to see John Stuart Mill making an appearance. Have a wonderful day.